hope everyone's well this morning. It's 10 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started as we've got a lot of information to kind of get through. First, quickly, while when you've all joined the meeting, you were on mute, and if you could stay on that, and if you unmuted yourself, please mute yourself back as our speaker talks, and I'll do the same so we don't get some background noise throughout this process. Again, thank you for joining our Small Business Matters webinar, Workforce Resiliency. We have a lot of information, like I said, to get to. So we're going to dive right in. We want you to make sure that all of you know what those executive orders and new federal legislation means for your HR issues and your workforce. I know I saw on the list there was quite a few of you that participate in our HR roundtable, so thank you all for joining today. Again, hope everyone is fine and weathering the situation well. We do have some sponsors for this webinar to thank. Our small business champions include GTR Media Group along with IBT, Southwestern Payroll, Tulsa Drillers, Tulsa Tech, and Lamar Outdoor Advertising. Our small business partners and advocates for this series include Aero Exterminators, High Tower Business Solutions, and AVV Bank. I do want to mention our sponsors of our HR focus group. We usually meet there at the chamber together in a conference room, and so sad that we can't do that, but Manpower and Tulsa Tech make sure that that is an opportunity for our HR professionals of our largest companies in Broken Arrow to get together and share ideas. So we're grateful to them for providing this platform for us to keep doing that. Again, this is our series. Today, our Workforce Resiliency webinar is your business ready for employment changes? And Kristen Breitmeyer of Donner, Saunders, Daniel, and Anderson has graciously given up an hour of her precious time today to go over some of the things that affect how the pandemic is affecting your workforce. So she's going to cover Disability, Americans with Disability Act, along with Family and Medical Leave Act and National Labor Relations. She provided us with a detailed handout, and many of you received that in your email yesterday. Michelle has put that in our chat as well, so if you didn't receive that email, please check the chat now and bring that PDF over to your desktop to follow Kristen's presentation this morning. Again, a few housekeeping items. Please keep on mute throughout this this presentation. It will be recorded, so if there's others that you want to invite to find out this information, it'll be on our website. You'll receive a link to it after. Also, if you want to go ahead and put questions in the chat, we can get to those at the end. We should have plenty of time to get to those questions. Before we get started, I do want to mention there's 2 upcoming webinars in this series, 11 Steps to Help Your Business Survive and Thrive During Economic Crisis is next Tuesday, and Layoffs and Unemployment Compensation is on Thursday. For that one, we will have Workforce Tulsa as well as Oklahoma Employment Security Commission, my acronyms, I'm getting them confused, will be on the phone with us. So look forward to having those folks join us. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Kristen and ask her to unmute. Kristen has a long experience in HR law. She's worked with companies, big and small, manufacturing, retail, insurance, paper, and other industries. I know we have a mutual friend that tells me she has a strong connection to Broken Arrow, so she might mention that to us as well. Look forward to getting started. Just going to turn it over to her now, and again, look in your chat for that resource guide. So
thanks, Darla. Thank you. And yes, I am actually a Broken Arrow High School graduate. I won't tell you the year, so we'll just let that go. But many years ago, I graduated from Broken Arrow High. So yes, I grew up there. So let's get started. My bio's long and uninteresting, but I have done employment law since I graduated from law school many years ago. So this is really all I do, and it has been crazy since the pandemic started. So what I have done is put together a paper for everyone, because by the time we finish talking, the thing I think folks need most are resources to go and find more information. I will say that even since I put this together, I think I sent it out to Darla 2 days ago, late Tuesday. Things have changed, because things change literally every day. And I'll try to highlight those changes as we go through, but resources are what everyone needs right now. This is just sort of how I think about things for employers. So I'll run through this and explain kind of what it is and how it can help you. So the first thing that is in the paper is sort of where we are in Oklahoma right now. And everybody knows generally where we are, because we're all at home. I'm at home, you're at home, everybody is at home. There are a couple of resources that everybody needs to know about and how to find them so you can keep up, because the news is not always your best resource in knowing what the law is. The news is a great resource to know that things are changing or things are happening, but you want to then know what's really happening for your company. So from the statewide level, what's happening is Governor Stitt is issuing orders and memoranda. Those are the two things he does that he's been doing since this pandemic started. He issues executive orders. An executive order is something his office can do, which is an order that impacts the state. As you'll see on the page of my paper, or you'll see where I've done that. And I have said it was last amended April 2nd, but in fact, he's issued at least one or maybe two, if my news this morning was correct. And then he's issued executive memorandum. The memorandum helped provide further context or meat, if you will, around the executive orders. Now, on C there, you'll see that I give you the site to where you can find those. That's important because, again, sometimes even what Governor Stitt says the orders say isn't exactly what the orders say. I'd like to kind of go through where we are on the 3 points that are talked about for businesses, because the order currently says this, that the 3 things that are most important for businesses: the non-essential business closings, and in actuality, it's not really essential and non-essential. Those aren't the words of the order, but that's how we've all talked about it. It's the critical infrastructure businesses. They were closed midnight, March 25th, and are to be closed until April 30. Now, of course, and that has not changed. What has changed is when that was first announced, it was tied to the federal guidance, which you can find online. And then there was a pretty quick, crazy swirling about, oh my gosh, everything's going to close. Governor then issued pretty quickly his executive memorandum, which you can find also at that website and read. And that has been changed, amended as well, so that you can then see what businesses in Oklahoma the governor considers to be essential, to use a quicker word than critical infrastructure businesses. So now more businesses are open for business, if you will, than are required to be closed. The governor also put in, and I did not put the link to it, but you can find it, a way in which if you believe your business is critical or essential, you can put in a request to the governor's office for consideration for your specific business. I understand I've had some clients do that, but the turnaround's pretty good to get a response on a particular business. So there are ways in which you can get a particular feedback for your business through that portal. The stay-at-home order, this is for vulnerable individuals. Try to talk too fast to get things covered. This is the one that I think is most misunderstood. The governor issued an order that said if you are over age 65 or you have serious underlying health conditions, I think it's actually serious underlying medical conditions, I've got my notes here on the screen, that you are to stay at home except for essential errands, which that part everybody gets. But the order specifically says, or if you're working in a critical infrastructure business, an essential business. This has come up a lot for clients of mine and others. Sorry, I should turn my phone off. Because in fact, the vulnerable individual part of his order does not require that vulnerable individuals not go to work if they work in an essential business. This has caused a lot of complications for employers in essential businesses with workers who fit the vulnerable individual classification and don't want to come to work or feel concerned about coming to work, and difficult conversations between their employers who may need them to come to work and their belief based upon press conferences that this order covers them when in fact the language does not cover them. So this is one of those times where the press briefings and the actual order are in conflict and can make for some complicated conversations with employees. So it is one of the times where you'll want to go and look at the actual order and see what it says versus some of the things that are just coming out in the media and from the governor's office. So that's one of those things. The last one that has come out of the governor's office is this idea that gatherings of 10 or more are prohibited. That was the press briefing, but the actual language of the order is social gatherings, which led to a lot of confusion for businesses about what does it mean to be a social gathering versus people at work in these essential businesses. Can we still go to work? Not as big of a problem in an office where you can distance easier, but what if you're working on the manufacturing floor? What if you're working in construction? How do we manage that? There has been a little more out of the governor's office. If you're at an essential business, you should do all you can to try to implement social distancing measures at work. But it is pretty clear his order is not to prohibit any gatherings of 10 or more in essential businesses, but really just social gatherings. Now, dropping down, you'll see I put local government orders. I put Broken Arrow's proclamation in there, City of Tulsa, City of Oklahoma City's. I haven't done all of them. You all may have businesses in other areas as well. Almost, I shouldn't say almost all, many of your local jurisdictions will also have orders that will cover the smaller municipality, towns, those sorts of things. And you should check with those because oftentimes those are going to be more restrictive for the local areas than the statewide order. For example, Oklahoma City and Tulsa's are more restrictive than the states. So you'll need to look at all of those as well as whatever the state has put in place to see whether you are in keeping with and your employees are in keeping with the current mandates. Most of them are running through April 30 right now, although of course, as I have said, literally every day is a new day when we wake up. So just want to kind of point that out. You would be wise, obviously, to watch the news. But then when you hear the news, it is really best if you're making decisions about your workplace and your employees to go and pull down the order. Generally, the way it works is they have a press conference, they make an announcement, and then a couple of hours later, it's posted to the appropriate site, and you can go and read it and see what it says. Okay, so moving on to subsection 2, I kind of just like to start with this premise because with all of the changes, I like to remind folks, employers, that in spite of all of the craziness that that's happening to everybody's workplace, everything that was true with regard to non-pandemic related things is still true. So although most of my days are spent doing pandemic related things, I still get a call because somebody has an employee who just had a normal thing happen, an unfortunate but normal thing happen. So someone might have a non-COVID related medical emergency. Someone might have a non-COVID related workers' compensation or workers' comp on the job injury. Don't forget, in the midst of everything that's happening, everything else that we've all been doing, right? So that is an issue that I, as an employment lawyer, I worry about, that we're going to forget everything else. Don't forget that you still have laws that govern race discrimination or gender discrimination or age discrimination. All of those laws still apply to your business. And don't forget, you have regular policies and things in place. If you have PTO, you still have PTO. If all of the normal things that you have are still in existence. So as best as we all can, I think it is comforting to your employees that if you normally do things, try to continue to normally do things. That can be helpful. So that's my reminder, that as much as you had normal things, try to have normal things. So let's talk about things that have changed since COVID-19 came to town. These laws I'm getting ready to talk about, some of them you may think don't apply to you if you are a particularly small employer, because some of these federal laws require 15 or 20 employees. But as a reminder, Oklahoma has also anti-discrimination laws which apply if you only have one employee or more. So please don't just check out as I talk for a few minutes, because this could also apply under Oklahoma law. So the things that the EEOC has been particularly mindful to remind us all during this time is discrimination based upon race or national origin. The EEOC is reporting an uptick in discrimination claims based upon people of Asian descent. The prevalence of comments about the virus being a Chinese virus or coming from China, or people of other nationalities bringing the virus here, is causing a backlash in some cases against people of other nationalities, other races. Obviously, if you see this happening in your workplace, you do have an obligation to shut that down. As you know, that would be no difference than anything else that would happen in your workplace regarding discrimination. That is not permitted. You cannot discriminate against any person in the workplace based upon their race or nationality. And if you permit hostility even among your coworkers against other coworkers, you could be fostering a hostile environment. So if you see, or first of all, don't engage in that, but if you see or observe coworkers engaging in that sort of behavior, you need to stop that. That would be inappropriate and certainly just a waste of their time when it could be better spent engaging in productive work behaviors. So they want us to be sure and remind everybody of that. The next thing on here is disability discrimination, and I've got an entire section of resources for that. There's really two main things on disability discrimination. The first is, in a wacky world, things that an employment lawyer would never, ever have told you to do before, we are telling you to do. And I will tell you these first two things on Roman numeral 4A and B, this pandemic preparedness and the what you should know about the ADA, both of those are very interesting reads if you have time and want to read them. The second one on subsection B, that's very, very short, but they're both very interesting because it does talk about, and the ADA, as you all know, the Americans with Disabilities Act is a lot of a balancing act. And what the EEOC is saying is that we are now, with regard to COVID, not everything, so not everything's on the table, but with regard to COVID-19, we are now in a national and state declared pandemic, an emergency health threat. So that under the ADA is a direct threat to the public. We are in a health threat, and in a direct threat situation like we have never seen before, we as employers are allowed to take steps that would be unprecedented, that I would never have told you to do before. Things like, you can take your employees' temperatures. You can ask your employees, are you coughing? If you observe them coughing, you can send them home. If you think they are sick, you can send them home. These are things that we would never have done before. As I have advised many employers, we live in a society Oklahoma for sure, where our mantra is, pardon my language, but suck it up and work through it, right? Tough it out. You're fine. You're fine. Work harder. You just work through the pain. You'll be fine. Everybody just come to work. I mean, even in my family, you feel bad? Well, you'll take a shower and go to work. You'll feel better. That is what we do. This is not the time when we're just supposed to work through it because the health emergency is too strong. So now employers are taking people's temperatures at work. They're taking people's temperatures before they make a conditional offer of employment, before they let you start to work, because the concern is too great. Now, again, don't forget what I said earlier about discrimination. You can't just take the temperature of people who look to be of Asian descent. That would be discrimination, right? You can't just look to take the temperature of people in a certain demographic of any sort. That would be discrimination. But if you have reason to believe that someone is sick, you may take their temperature. Now, you can't ask them their medical history. You can't ask them other invasive questions. You can't say, wow, I know, or I've read on the CDC that people with underlying health conditions are more susceptible. So I'd like to know your entire medical history. Do you have high blood pressure? Do you have diabetes? Do you have any, are you immunocompromised? Those would be invasive questions that you cannot ask. But the basic ones on the website, do you have a fever? Are you coughing? Do you have shortness of breath? The big three, if you will. If you're observing those things, if you can take the temperature of somebody, which is not invasive, and they are showing symptoms, you can send them home. Okay. Now, when this pandemic is over, all the employment lawyers are going to stand up and say, now stop doing that. No longer do you have that right, but right now you can. So there's really good common sense things to do on those pamphlets if you want to read more about what you can and can't do. Now, on D, I will tell you that confidentiality, the EEOC has come out and really had some strong comments about that, because now we get into the other part. People talk a lot about what HIPAA does. Most employers are not covered by HIPAA. HIPAA covers doctors, it covers insurance companies, it covers health plans. It doesn't cover normal employer information, all right? But the ADA does. The ADA requires employers to keep confidential medical information it gets. So what can we do when we balance this idea of a pandemic and health information we get? Again, it's sort of that idea of need to know. Temperature is not really health information. So taking their temperature and making a decision is one thing. Now, what's happening so frequently is you'll have somebody who tells you, I know somebody who thinks they have COVID. I had, not as much anymore because we're all home, but a couple of weeks ago, I had dinner with somebody who thinks they have COVID, or somebody in my house thinks they have COVID. And what do people do with that information? Well, the EEOC says what you don't do with that information is tell everybody you know. Okay, that's really, it's sort of like it's not your secret to share. So employers are having to make very difficult decisions because you're balancing the privacy information of someone versus the workforce's right to know. Now, if somebody comes to you and says, I'm in your workforce, I'm positive for COVID. Now, you always have the obligation to alert the Tulsa Health Department or the health department that's covering the jurisdiction where you are. So maybe you're in Wagner County and you would tell the Wagner County Health Department. But you would alert that, make sure that the health department knows that there's a positive, an actual positive, because they need to do the tracking and all of that. You would tell the need to know management at your department or at your company, and HR if you have that. And then you have to decide, and this is the really tough part, and there's some guidance out there, who has to know at your employer? Now, what the EEOC is saying is you never tell the name. Now, a lot of you are going to have small employers. They're going to say, well, everybody's going to know. And they say, we get that. But you still don't tell the person's name. So you would have to decide, who do I have to tell in order to be sure that people are protected? So if Susie calls and says, I have a positive test for COVID-19, and you know that Susie has been already teleworking for 16 days just because your office has made that decision, maybe you don't need to tell anyone because Susie hasn't been in physical contact with anybody at your workplace, then you don't tell anybody. But if Susie has been in a work group at a manufacturing facility and she's been in very close contact with a work group of 8 people, then maybe you decide that that 8 people need to know that someone they've worked with has tested positive for COVID-19. And they're going to say, oh my God, is it Susie? And you're going to say, I can't say. And they're going to go, oh, well, it's Susie. but the EEOC says, don't say. So those are some questions you'll have to work through to protect the confidentiality of the person while still protecting the health of other people. These are questions you will want to consult the guidance I've listed here and make sort of on a case by case. Hopefully you won't have to make those decisions, but confidentiality is becoming very important in all of this. So that's really that guidance just came out, I don't know, 4 or 5 days ago. Everything is as I said, rolling out. That webinar is a very good information, and the second link I gave you is a transcript of that. So if you don't want to watch it live, you can read the guidance as well. The next thing I have on here, gosh, it all goes, there's so much to talk about. It's already 10:27. The Family Medical Leave Act. As you all know, there are the Families First Coronavirus Response Act amended the Family and Medical Leave Act. I want to just put this in here to explain to you all a little bit that if you were already covered by the FMLA, again, that still exists and you still have obligations under the FMLA. This new paid leave integrates with that. So, and I'll talk about that more in a minute, but just so that you understand, if you already provided FMLA, and let's say you had an employee who has already used 6 of their weeks of the FMLA on your rolling or your 12 months, however you're counting it, most of you all use rolling probably, then they don't have the full entitlement that you're hearing about in the press. So it sounds like they've got 12 weeks to take care of their kids for coronavirus, but if they've already used 6 weeks, they only have 6 weeks. And so again, sometimes there's a lot of miscommunication. Your employees think that there's something out there that there's not because of the press. And no disrespect, it's the way Congress rolled it out. That's how the press conference from Congress came out. I was like, oh my gosh, you got all this stuff. But they don't. They have whatever's left of their entitlement already. Now, again, if you've got a rolling year, they could pick it up throughout the year till the end of December. But it's integrated. So if they have only 6 weeks left, they've only got 6 weeks until they pick up more time. So it is a little more complicated. I won't spend a lot of time because we're running out of time. But and if you all are small employers and you've never provided FMLA before, you still have to provide it because you are now automatically covered for this one little part. So let's go to whatever page is this on my sheet, page 3, I think, where we talk about the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. This is the thing that is the biggie. Almost everybody's covered. I think we're targeting here small businesses. So if you have under 500 employees, you're covered. If you don't have your posters up yet, please put them up. They should have gone up April 1st. There's a link in here. You can get to them. One of the things in here, so there's 2 things, the paid sick leave, which is what I like to call up to the 80 hours, and then the expanded FML, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But I want to talk about on this page the small business exemption. This got a lot of press first. People got super excited because they thought really small employers were going to get out of it. The small business exemption really only gets you out of the parts that deal with taking care of your kids. So the parts dealing with people who are sick or taking care of people who are sick, or the quarantine part, that's off the table altogether. So even small employers are covered for that. And I've put in here the test for the small business exemption. It is more narrow than, again, I think it was rolled out by Congress. I put it in here. We can talk about it if anybody has any questions. I would like to just point out that the first one here, 1-1, somebody has to certify these things, but the first one, where I think a lot of people thought it was going to be the one about the business and financial obligations exceeding the available business revenues and cause a small business to cease operating. Please just remember, this will be, in my opinion, pretty tough to certify because of the tax credits. So in that the businesses are getting the money back through a tax credit, I think that's going to be a pretty tough one. I think the businesses are really going to have to rely on number 2 and number 3, which may in fact be something you could certify. But it's really just a cash flow issue with the IRS tax credits. So again, we can talk about that if you have questions, but I think the small business exemption is much less available to small businesses than was originally let on. Again, on the next page, regardless if you're going to try to claim that or not, you have to put the posters up, and there's links to the posters. The posters are now in English and Spanish, so that's available if you have a high number of folks who speak Spanish. If you are fully teleworking, you need to distribute it in some other manner. You can email it out, post it on internet, etc. Who is eligible is on the next page, page 4. For paid sick leave, all of your employees are eligible from the moment they get on your payroll. So if you hire them, the very next day they could claim paid sick leave. There's no waiting period, there's nothing. Part-times, anybody, they're eligible immediately. For the expanded FML, they have to be 30 days, and that's 30 days on your payroll. And if they are a temp to hire, the time they are a temp at your location counts towards that 30 days. We'll go to the chart in just a second, but I wanted to point out on subsection D that link to the IRS guidance and the tax credits is very helpful. Of course, everybody's interested on how to do the tax credits. There's excellent information on there. I obviously don't have the time to go through all of it, but really, really good information on both sort of the concept of it and then the practical application, links to the Form 7200 that you'll need to file. If you think you will be short even to make the payments to the employees and how that works, there's information on how to do that. So it's really excellent. At the bottom of page 4 and onto the next page, this is a very practical, and I try to put in the most practical things I could. So what is it that you can ask from your employees who are asking for the paid sick leave and or this extended FMLA? This is the actual information. Some of it's very practical. And so we've put in here what it is you can ask for. Most of it's very straightforward and makes sense, so I won't go over it. A couple things I wanted to point out. I took this straight from the rules, so if it's written sort of that way, that's why, but I wanted to give you the exact language. On page 5, you can see I've put in here this note. That's just really a typographical error I'm sure that they made that they'll fix, but this is everything. One of the questions that I had and a lot of lawyers had at the very beginning was this whole idea that the leave to take care of your kids. A lot of kids are out. I will say I'm lucky. My kids, my youngest, I've got twin 15-year-old boys, right? So I'm not really taking care of them. As I like to say, at 15, they really don't want you home with them anyway. But if you had younger children, you would need someone to take care of them. The law goes up to the age of 18. The law that was passed by Congress says up to age 18 and includes elementary and secondary schools. And I was thinking, I mean, I certainly can see if you had a child with special needs that might be involved, right? But certainly if I called my employer and said, I needed to stay home with my 15-year-old, they might go, I don't think so. So the DOL did not address that at all. The DOL did address the idea that if you were concerned that, you know, 2 spouses were going to stay home, that might not be right. Take this leave. So it does address that. You have to certify that only one person is staying home, that you're the only person who can stay home and take care of the child or children. But when you get to page 6, you will see that the IRS was a little more particular about that. In addition to certifying that you're the only person who will be taking care of this child or these children while there's no childcare or school available for the child. You'll see in this paragraph toward the bottom, if the child is over 14 during the daylight hours, a statement that special circumstances exist requiring the employee to provide care. And that kind of makes sense. Again, while one doesn't want to pass judgment on another person's parenting, and again, I have 15-year-olds, at some point you think perhaps a 15-year-old would be able to stay home and self-regulate, barring special circumstances. So in order to get the tax credit, which everybody is going to want, that would be a legitimate question to ask your employee if he or she wanted to take time off and get the expanded FMLA or paid sick leave to take care of a child. 14 or under, that question is not necessary to answer. It is just that you would need to take time off. So I will say also, one of the things that changed from the law to the regulations is the law says childcare. School is no question, obviously, but childcare for a childcare provider that you pay. The regulations clarify that, and it doesn't have to be for pay. It's just someone who regularly provides childcare. So it could be a grandparent, a family member, a neighbor, etc. So they did loosen that, recognizing that a lot of folks have childcare arrangements that don't involve the exchange of money. So the last question on page 6 is, do you have to hold the job open for them while they are on these various forms of leave? The short answer is yes. There is a long way out. Don't cut them off without seeking legal counsel, or at least reading the regulations on that. And the regulations are posted online, but it's not easy. You should consider that as protected leave. On the next page, page 7, I've given just some quick cites. The National Labor Relations Board, and I don't know if anybody's unionized, so I won't spend a lot of time because most folks in this part of the country aren't. They had done a temporary hold on all elections. We didn't know how long that was going to last. It only lasted 2 weeks, and they started them back up on this past Monday. The only really other thing of interest, other than they've closed a lot of offices like everybody, is the General Counsel did put out a memo, which was kind of interesting. If you have a collective bargaining agreement, if you're operating under that, and you are looking to make changes given the extraordinary situation under which we are all living, the General Counsel has put out an interesting memo on bargaining obligations during a emergency situation, which kind of goes through some of the case law on that, which can give you some guidance on unilateral changes that are imposed during this time and what sort of backlash you might face. As you might expect, unions and companies might not see it the same way as to the rights during this time. The kind of things you might see are obviously unilateral changes in the conditions of work right now, and then also layoffs, furloughs, those sorts of things. So that's maybe a week ago, maybe a little longer, he put that out, but that's interesting. OSHA, and please know I am not, OSHA is really not my area, but there is some excellent guidance that OSHA put out. Now, the first one, the guidance on preparing workplaces, that came out about a month ago. So already some of the science data is outdated on that. And since I put this together 2 days ago, yesterday OSHA came out with an actually pretty interesting, just one-page poster with 10 steps on keeping your workplace and workers safe, which is kind of just a cute little poster that you can put up in your workplace. If you go to their webpage, you can download that. And then of course, it's got tons of worker specific. So if you have workers who ordinarily use PPE, if you have respiratory therapist type workers or workers in the healthcare profession, they have more specifics on that. If you have questions about how to handle OSHA logs during this time, those sorts of things, they've got more specific guidance on that. So 10:40, I know I want to have time for questions. If I can obviously expects changes. Then the last thing I put on here, which is the chart. So just give me a few minutes to talk about this, and then I see there's some chat down here, which I haven't been able to read while we're talking, or while I'm mostly talking. This is a chart I put together to sort of think through how the two parts of the leave work. So the first 3 columns in the gray and white are, and hopefully you all see it in color, the first 3 columns are the paid sick leave. This is the up to 80 hours leave. This is the one that covers all employers under 500 employees. And the eligible employees are eligible at 0 hours, 0 days, okay? On the first column, you'll see the 6 reasons for which a person could take that paid sick leave. Now, the 6th one I'll just knock out of the park first. That is the catch-all in case the Secretary of Health and Human Services comes up with something else. That has not happened. I don't have any idea whether that will happen, but as of today, that category is just a catch-all in case something else horrible happens. Not hoping for that. So you can kind of disregard that. The first category is the employee subject to a quarantine or isolation order related to COVID. I will say the most complicated thing we're seeing right now about this is, in fact, that vulnerable individual thing we talked about earlier, and that is folks who think they are covered, but they're not. So somebody who is over 65 or has a serious health condition, but has work to go to because they're in an essential business, they're not covered by the governor's order. So they call and they say, I want the paid sick leave because I'm subject to that. And the employer says, but you're not. And so there is a concern or a complicated conversation for that because they are technically not covered by Governor Stitt's order. The second one is they've been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine due to concerns related to COVID. And that's really important. So they don't have to have COVID, just related to concerns. And we've seen all kinds of doctor's notes coming in. And keep in mind, no one can see a doctor right now. So there are a lot of things. People are doing telemedicine, people are emailing or doing video chats with doctors, and you'll see notes from doctors saying things like, I have a concern, this person might have COVID, I have a concern. Anything like that signed by anybody who looks like a healthcare provider probably will qualify for this one. But it can't just be, hey, I coughed today and I think I might have COVID. It has to be from a healthcare provider. And I don't mean to be harsh or overly strict, but if you want the tax credit, you have to fit the boxes, okay? So the next one is the employee is experiencing symptoms and seeking a diagnosis. Again, that's the part that has to be certified. It can't just be, I don't feel well and I'm staying home. There have to be efforts by that person that they're seeking a diagnosis from a healthcare provider. Again, these are all things that are required for the tax credit, not by me, not by anybody else. For the employee is caring for somebody who is subject to 1 or 2. I'm going to stop there for just a second. 1, 2, and 3, those are paid at basically the person's regular rate of pay, up to 80 hours. And then the third column you will see are the caps, $511 per day or $51.10 in the aggregate. Those are the caps that you are required to pay, and more importantly, those are the caps that the IRS is going to give you a tax credit for, plus the built-in qualifying wages, which the IRS will explain. Okay. Below, so 4, 5, and 6, which is caring for, then caring for the child who is out of school or out of childcare, plus number 6, which we have no idea what it is 2/3 of the regular rate of pay. And that cap is $200 a day. In no event can it be lower than minimum wage. So no lower than minimum wage at the top or 2/3 of minimum wage at the bottom. All of that is capped for up to 80 hours. And it's up to 80 hours for somebody who is regularly scheduled to work 40 hours for you a week. If somebody's regular schedule is 8:30 to 5 with a 1-hour lunch break, then that person is regularly scheduled to work 37.5 hours a week. So that person would only be entitled to, what is that, 78 hours? Is my math bad? 37.5, whatever that is. Less than 80 hours. So 80 hours assumes that person's regular schedule is 40 hours per week. If the person's regular schedule is less than that, then you prorate that for the 2 weeks. Interestingly, this 80 hours is fixed for April 1 to December 31st. If somebody works for you and takes 40 hours and then goes to work for employer B, they still can only get 40 hours more. They don't get a new 80 hours at a new employer. So if you have a new employee who works for you, let's say starting May 1st or May 15, it would be within your rights to say, and they apply for leave, have you had any paid sick leave prior to this time? Because the IRS will reimburse you only per employee per person for 80 hours. So if they have already had 40 hours somewhere else, you will not be subject or eligible for reimbursement. Okay, the last 2 columns explain this expanded FML. Again, as you can see on these first ones, it's not available at all. There's just nothing more than the 80 hours for most of these categories. So if somebody really gets sick with COVID, they are capped at the 80 hours for a full-time employee, less if they're regularly scheduled to work less. But for caring for the son or daughter who has no school or no childcare, with those other qualifications we talked about, you're the sole provider, and if you're over 14, etc. After that first 80 hours, you could get up to 10 weeks paid at $200 a day. Now, again, the integration is kind of weird, and then I'll stop talking because I know I'm running late. Again, all of this works together. I could take my 80 hours for being sick or quarantined. Then over here on the blue side, I actually have, if I have taken no FMLA for any other reason, so I have my full 12-week allotment, I really have 12 weeks under the FML, the first 2 weeks unpaid, and then 10 weeks paid at the 2/3. If I have taken no paid sick time, I could take my 80 hours for taking care of my kids paid, which coincides with my first 2 weeks unpaid, so that I would have 80 hours paid under the white columns and then 10 weeks paid under the blue columns, all at the 2/3. I can opt, if I'm not sick now, but I need to take care of my kids, to take the first 2 weeks. Let's say I have PTO. I could take my first 2 weeks under PTO and then my last 10 weeks at 2/3 under the expanded FMLA, saving my 80 hours in case I get sick later. I could do that. So it's kind of a mix and match, and I get to pick as the employee how I want to do that. So you can't force me to take my paid sick leave to watch my kids now. I can save that because I might be concerned I could get sick later and I need that. So I'm going to stop there because in case there are questions, because I'm running really late, but I want to explain that there's just a whole lot of moving parts. And I guess I'll say one last thing, because I said I'd stop and now I'm not. Every time you get a question, please don't have a knee-jerk reaction. Please take a moment and sort of think through and figure out what might be the best answer, because again, it is changing and evolving just so very quickly. Okay, Darla, I'll stop talking for a second.
Well, thank you for all of that. And I especially thank you for the work you put in on providing this handout. I know the HR professionals on the call will really appreciate having this, especially the grid as a guide. I will open it up for questions now. If there is anyone that has one, you can just unmute yourself and kind of ask a question, or hold up your hand and Michelle or I will unmute you. I know I have one question for sure. I have a couple. Is there anyone? I know Bill will, if he's on the call, I think he had this question earlier a couple of weeks ago, and I think we got the same answer that Kristen came up with on splitting that time up for one of his employees. So Anyone
Carla,
have
it
any?
looks like Melinda has a question. She's
Okay.
asking specifically about that chart, Kristen. She's saying under the blue column, how many employees do you have to be required to follow that portion of the table?
Okay, so again, this is the weird thing. Under, it's completely contrary, under 500 employees. And so that's strange because for the FMLA, you have to have 50 or more for normal FMLA, but for the blue part of the column, it is under 500. So I know it makes no sense. I did not write this law. So employers who are already FMLA covered will have a much better understanding of this because they've already been implementing the FMLA for a long time. And so they can integrate this much more easily with their already existing policy. So I would say there's sort of like two groups. There's the FMLA employers already who are 50 to 499, and they'll just integrate this in. And then I've got the group of employers who are 0 to 50 who have not had an FMLA policy before, but now have this. So if you are 0 to 50, you still have to apply this paid leave under the FMLA for just this one category from April 1 until December 31st of this year. Sorry.
That's great. Thank you. Is there, does anyone else have a question? You can type it into the chat or just unmute yourself, honestly, and ask the question. While you guys are thinking, one thing that came to mind, and I think I'm clear on this, but just to make 100% sure, these tax credits have nothing to do with the loans, the PPP or the EIDL. Those are two separate things, and it's not an either or in any way, right? With the tax credit.
Yes, so there's so many things out there. So the money that you pay under these two leave programs that I've described here, dollar for dollar, what you pay out in the paid leave, either the paid sick leave, the up to 80 hours, or the expanded FML, this 10 weeks to take care of your kids, what you do is, in essence, and I'm going to do the shortcut, in essence, it's an immediate, I say immediate, it's a quick payroll tax credit. So if I pay out, I'll use easy math because it's easy for me. If I pay $100 to Joe on a paid sick leave, then when I go to make my payroll taxes to the government, instead of, and let's say I would owe $500 in payroll taxes, I would simply submit $400 and retain the $100. So I basically just hold that back immediately when I submit my payroll taxes. And there's a new form 7200 that you use to do all this. There are new forms which you need to go get. And again, it's all on that link I give you. And it's not just the dollars, but there are what they call qualifying wages. So it's the wages and the qualifying healthcare expenses that are attendant to those wages, and it explains all how you do that. So again, it's a cash flow issue to the business, so that the business should not be out much. Now, I will say this: it is a tax credit, so that money goes to the business's revenue at the end of the year. So I'm not an accountant, but it will go to your revenue at the end of the year. So there'll be some consequence to that, of which I cannot advise you. That is very different than the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Plan, where businesses go in and apply for a loan, and there is some loan forgiveness at the end, depending upon how many people you retain. That one will not affect the other, other than allowing this paid leave could help you, because it should not adversely impact your ability to keep them right now, other than, again, a very, very small window of cash flow, just however long it is that you pay in. So a lot of employers are doing their payroll submissions to the government very quickly, so the cash flow is a very short issue. If you don't submit till quarterly, then your cash flow problem could be till quarter, right? But yes, they're separate.
There is another question in the chat, Kristen, if you can see that. It says the 80 hours paid sick leave is in addition to paid time off that you already provide. And then it follows up with, and is it required for employers with over 500 employees?
Okay, I'm going to do this in reverse. So these paid leave programs are only for employers with fewer than 500 employees. Don't know why, but that is the law. So if you have more than 500 employees, you are not covered. You can disregard that entire chart. How does PTO work? So these two leave programs that I've described are absolute rights of the employee. Now, an employee can opt and choose to use or take whatever leave you have offered. Remember I talked about earlier that what you have is still what you have. The employee cannot be paid more than his or her full wages. But for example, if the employee is on 2/3 pay and you're willing to do this, what could happen is you could get 2/3 pay for being home with the kids. And if they have PTO available for them, they could take 1/3 PTO so that they would be at full wages. Now, of course, the IRS is only going to give you a tax credit for the 1/3 of wages that are allowed under the chart. Now, where it will become complicated is on this idea of caps. So if you have an employee who makes more such that the cap, you know, they get paid the 2/3, but the cap is, let's say, the $200 a day cap. If you give them such amount of money that it really wouldn't be 2/3, but you're going to let them get whole pay pushing the PTO, still that may be more than 1/3, but you could allow them to push enough PTO to get them up to their regular wages. Still, they can only get the employer can only get the $200 a day IRS reimbursement. So the law doesn't really care as much about what you're doing with the extra as much as what is required as a minimum of you, and then what the IRS will let you take as a credit. But you cannot ever, sorry, darling, you cannot ever disallow them from taking the leave if they say, I want to take the leave. And I should say one other thing I should have covered earlier. When you have these categories, for example, got a lot of employers who will, for example, they have the situation where they think the employee is sick or they think the employee should go home. The employee thinks the employee should go home. This vulnerable individual population, for example, everyone agrees an employee should go home, but the employee can't go to the doctor or whatever it is. They may not qualify for paid sick leave, right? They may not qualify for this 80 hours, but everyone agrees it's for everybody's best benefit. You can still do that, and whether you decide that they can take PTO or they go home unpaid, etc., that's still just a decision that you're making. That may not qualify for paid sick leave that's reimbursed, but you still have the right and or obligation, moral or otherwise, to make good decisions for your business. So you could have a situation where, let's say, it's just common knowledge in your business that Joe has just undergone a kidney transplant. Well, under the order, if you're an essential business, maybe Joe has no quarantine order because you're an essential business and Joe should still come to work. But let's just say everybody goes, Joe really shouldn't come to work. It's just not safe for Joe. Joe should go home. And Joe's like, yeah, I really want to go home. Well, then Joe should go home. Just because you can't get the paid sick leave reimbursement doesn't mean that Joe shouldn't go home. It's just in everybody's best benefit. And then whether Joe has PTO or you just send Joe home, or maybe in worst case scenario, you can't afford that and you lay Joe off. These are the kinds of real life decisions that are being made every single day with employers right now that you have to think through. So don't get too tied to, this chart is all about what the law requires as a minimum and what will be reimbursed through this tax credit. But other real decisions are being made right now about people's lives and best case scenarios. And those are the really complicated things. I'm sorry, Darla, go ahead.
just to be really, thank you so much, Kristen. Just to be thankful, I mean, very, just looking at the clock and to be really respectful for your time because we know how busy you are. We are at an hour. We thank you for all this information, Chris. I see your message in the chat, and that presentation is in the chat, but we will send it out to you, that information sheet that Kristen provided. So thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge with all of us. I know this is a vastly changing environment, but thank you for jumping on the phone with us and kind of clearing up some questions that I know a lot of our businesses had. And just before we end the call, I do want to share my screen with you one last time. And just to remind you of the webinars that are coming up next week, please check our website, Broken Arrow Chamber. www.bachamber.com. I know you can get to it from there. We have resources on there, links to a lot of the places that Kristen was talking about. So again, thank you for your time, and thanks to all our sponsors that allowed us to bring this information to you. Thanks a lot, guys. Thanks, Kristen. Appreciate it so much.
Thank you for having me, Darla.
Have a good day.